Still am.
Priest has a lot of good stuff, although we're not starting with anything particularly fantastic. We have Initiation. Excuse me, misread it. It's a 6-mana rare spell. Deal 4 damage to a minion, and if it kills it, summon a brand new copy. We already have the Holy Water. There was already a card that basically did the same thing, only it was slightly cheaper. And instead of summoning the minion, it put it in your hand, which actually mattered for battlecry effects and such like that. Initiation, I think, it's just slow, right? So yeah, if you kill it, you summon a new copy. I don't like this. It doesn't really fit into priest decks. The deal 4 damage is quite low. You're not hitting like fantastic things with it. Like you want to be hitting things that have like health, that have good stats, because you know you're paying 6 mana for this effect. But priest doesn't have a great real way to do damage. I just don't like this card. I don't think it will see much play, and I don't really see where it fits in priest.
Yeah, even in Highlander Priest, it doesn't even see play. Sometimes you pick it off of Discovers because it's insane in that way. But on average, no, you almost never pick Initiation. And now, with Dark Moon Fire existing, you just run Silas Darkmoon, which is essentially a mind control effect, which is almost what this is, but better. Because no one plays around Silas Darkmoon.
That's right now.
For 1 more mana.
Next is Wave of Apathy, which we saw for Paladin. I think this card is much better in Priest.
Priest
has effects where you can steal your opponent's minions if they have 2 or less attack, and this is only 1 mana.
It shouldn't be 1 mana.
There
should be at least 2.
Also, a Spellburst minion that can steal 2 attack or less guys. So you can play this and Spellburst this card and steal whatever minion you want from them, which is really strong.
Happened a lot. So much so that the
I
card
think
got
that
nerfed.
this might actually see some play in like Highlander Priest decks running both of those cards.
Yep, that's true.
And I think this will likely see some play in Priest because, again, it's not just an anti-aggro tool. You can also just use this to steal your opponent's guys, which is like really strong. So, again, I think that's where its home will be. I think it's much better in Priest than in Paladin.
This card was so good in Priest that in duplicate control decks, they were running 2 copies of Wave of Apathy. Sometimes they ran 2 copies of Cobalt Spellkin alongside it, and 2 copies of One Maker just to generate Wave of Apathies, potentially. I mean, there are other good 1-cost spells they can generate, like Draconic Studies, and a couple other different ones. But Wave of Apathy was a good hit off of those minions, and they were running them. They are currently run right now in Highlander Priest. Wave of Apathy is one of the best cards in Priest right now. It's absurd how good it is alongside the Cabal stealing minions, and it's probably one of the reasons why One Maker and Cobalt Spellkin are seeing so much play in Priest, in Highlander Priest.
Next up is Draconic Studies.
This alongside
it's the Studies for Priest. It's a 1 mana common spell. Discover a dragon. Your next one costs 1 less. Maybe we'll see play in Highlander Priest if that deck comes around. Maybe in Galakron Priest. I feel like you'll see this card a lot because it'll get discovered or randomly given to you through things like Sethic Veil Weavers, through Renews, etc., etc.
I forgot
Priest
Renew,
has a lot of
another
ways
great
to generate spells, so you'll likely see this in one way or another. I don't know if this will be the kind of card you run in your deck because
they do.
Again, like most of the studies, it's hard to fit in. The only one I can see being run main deck is the Druid one so far. Or maybe the Mage one in the spell damage based deck. Both of those.
But no, Draconic Studies, Primordial Studies, and Nature Studies were the best ones. I think actually Primordial Studies ended up being the best overall. And then Draconic Studies, actually, after the Discover and random card generation change, I'd say Nature Studies fell off quite a bit, even though it is technically ramp and is still really good. It's just Draconic Studies and Primordial Studies ended up being better. But it was still top 3, I think. It was one of the best ones.
Is desperate for this. Like, they just need this kind of card. I mean, the 1 mana discount on any dragon is kind of nice. Next up is Mindrender Illusia, which is a 2 mana legendary minion. It's a 1/3 with the battle cry to swap hands and decks with your opponent until your next turn. This is insane combo disruption. This just bullies combo decks out of the standard format, and I think this will honestly is going to be so good that it will see wild play as well.
It was so good that it got nerfed. It was the first Scholomance card to see nerfs, and it was nerfed alongside Kel'Thas Sunstrider because it broke the wild format. Straight up. And it still sees a lot of play in the wild format, and is part of the reason why Raza Priest is so broken right now.
Wild decks are just going to completely
very
disappear
deliberately.
from... Like, wild combo decks are going to disappear because Priest can just run a 2 mana 1/3 that completely destroys their entire combo with, like, no effort whatsoever. Mage Like, if you have the mage quest completed, no you don't. I just stole your quest complete mage and destroyed you with it. This might just be the card we needed right now. It will absolutely destroy quest mages.
It actually doesn't destroy quest mages. Quest mages quickly learn to play around Minor and Elucia, but it's again, be careful what I wish for.
Super looking forward to that. I do think that this actually is a little bit dangerous to put into Raza Priests in Wild, because you are a combo deck yourself with things like Anduin and the Spawn of Shadows, but also you have alternate win conditions, and at the same time, as long as the Spawn of Shadows is in your deck, or you know what's going on with it, you probably don't have to worry too much about it. Again, I just think this is such a good anti-combo card that it will see play. Like, in control decks, in tempo-y decks, it's just really good. In Standard, I've already slotted this into my Tempo Priest build that I'm trying, and my Galakron Priest build that I'm trying, because they're both fantastic. Sometimes this will suck. You'll play this, and your opponent will draw, like, your Galakron, or your Raza, and they'll get the effect, and you won't, which is a bit of a downside, but most of the time I feel like the disruption, if you know you're against combo decks, this is such a good tech card. Like, if you're seeing a lot of combo decks, this is a great tech card against those guys.
So it turned out that Minor Elucia had basically no weaknesses whatsoever. At 2 mana, you could play her on curve against aggro decks and completely fuck their tempo up for the rest of the game and destroy them, which is why it was nerfed to 3 mana. Because it was a huge tempo swing to play a 1-3 on turn 2, because it basically meant that aggro would skip a turn, which was crazy strong for Priest. And I talked about a minor downside. Yeah, your opponent gets to draw a card from your deck and potentially play it, but when the upside is, oh, you just win the game because you destroyed your opponent's combo or their tempo, it's well worth it, and probably deserved to be nerfed. Minor Elucia was insane.
Next up is Raise Dead. Oh, we haven't seen Warlock yet. It's a 0 mana common spell. Deal 3 damage to your hero. Return 2 friendly minions that died this game to your hand. This is deceptive. It's actually really quite strong. Resurrect effects usually resurrect to the battlefield, and that's what makes them so strong. Because you're paying usually less mana than you did for the effect in the first place. But this is still a really nice resurrect effect because it's 0 mana. Its value, it'll get you 2 minions back that died. If they're Battlecry minions, you'll get those back, which makes them better for resurrect decks, although I don't think this will see play in wild resurrect based decks because they already have a critical mass of good resurrect cards. Maybe this will see play in Res Priest in Standard because they want more resurrect effects. I mean, and this essentially allows you to play the whatever minion that died, right? Like, you'll be able to play this, you get the 2 minions back, and since it costs you no mana, you'll be able to play the minion that died anyway. And if you could play the minion in the first place, then that's fine. I mean, essentially, it's a 0 mana, draw 2 cards, right?
Yep. That's all technically true.
Again, there are times where this won't hit. Sometimes you'll have, like, a sheep from a polymorph, or tokens and whatnot, but it's still good value. I think you'll see this from time to time, maybe in Priest, but I'm not entirely sure.
I think if we're looking at the numbers objectively, I would say Raise Dead was one of the top 10 best cards in the set, and I'll elaborate more on that when we get to Warlock, I think. But it's still insanely good in Priest, and still sees play right now as basically an extra copy of any minion in a Highlander deck that dies, right? Like, sometimes Priest will just tempo Zephyrus on turn 2 for a wild growth or whatever, because if it dies, they just get it back with a Raise Dead. It ended up seeing play in basically all versions of Control Priests, and even potentially some Tempo Priests when they still existed. Tempo Priest was not a great deck, though.
Next up is Power Word Feast. It's a 2 mana rare.
Interesting to say Tempo Priest was not a very good deck, as we're about to talk about Power Word Feast.
A spell to give a minion +2/+2 and restore it to full health at the end of this turn. Wow, this is fun. I really love this card. It fits well into current builds of Tempo Priest with things like Abbess Alura we already saw in Paladin, like Sethic Veilweaver. Priest really needs good buffs right now, and this is a great buff. It's an efficient buff at 2 mana 2/2, and restoring him into the full health at the end of this turn is quite good. It means that you can play this, trade in the late game, and get your minion healed back for basically nothing. So you can take a big trade you wouldn't normally do because you're on the risk of losing your minion next turn to a really efficient trade. And then your minion will heal up at the end and be really difficult to remove, especially if it's got a thick defensive stat line.
So the thing with Tempo Priest is not its strength. The thing with Tempo Priest was that it runs out of cards, and Voracious Reader is not great in a deck like that because you need board control, and there's a lot that needs to line up for a Tempo Priest to work. You need minions on the board to be constantly healing, you need a constant supply of buffs and good minions in your hand, and you need to not run out of cards. Voracious Reader is such a weak card in Tempo Priest because it's a bad vanilla minion, and you're incentivized to dump your hand, which isn't necessarily why Tempo Priest runs out of cards. Tempo Priest runs out of cards because it needs to keep up with other decks, and the best way it can do that is just by playing everything, even if it's inefficient to do so. So yeah, I would love to see Tempo Priest get some more tools in this next expansion, and if they do, it would be nice. But yeah, they need a lot of help right now to get that to work.
Again, High Abbess Alura is back. She's legendary. She's also in Priest. I am going to use her in Tempo Priest. You have things like Grave Rune, you have Psych Split, even Power Word Feast is still quite good on this card. There are some other less good options. I mean, you could run things like Embalming Ritual to give her Reborn. Again, Abbess Alura I think is going to be great, and we'll see definite play in Paladin. I want to force her to work in Priest in some kind of tempo deck running buffs or like cube style cards, because if you hit, say, like a Psych Split off of this, the second one you have is going to also have the Spell Burst effect that can be redone. Same with Grave Rune, etc, etc. I think it's really strong, and it fits well into that sort of tempo-y style build, which I don't think is there yet, but I'm going to try and force it to work. I think this is much better as a Paladin card.
It's definitely much better as a Paladin card. The thing with Alura is, in Priest, you have a lot of great remover spells. You have your Time Rips, you have Plague of Deaths, but then you also have a lot of small spells that are really great, like Wave of Apathy, like Renew, like Draconie Studies. So Abbess, Alura just hasn't found a home in Priest. It just seems like she's a gift-wrapped Paladin card. I'd love to use her in Tempo Priest, but right now Tempo Priest just doesn't have the tools.
Next up, we have Devout Pupil again. In Priest, you do have things like Renew to target your minions, which will discount this, and Renew can give you things like Power Word Feast, can give you Embalming Rituals, can give you things like Psych Splits, which, I mean, yeah, sucks if you really need the discount on this, but I think if you're running this card in your deck, you probably don't care how much it gets discounted by, because eventually it will just cost you nothing. And then it's just a great play to combo with other things. So I think it's just good enough in that deck. If you're running buffs or if you're running spells, you're typically going to cast on your minions. Definitely want to try this in a Tempo Priest build that runs buffs and things like that.
The thing with Renew in Tempo Priest is that it's a low roll off of Alura. And you want to hit like your Psych Split, your Grave Runes. You want better, more tempo-based spells off your Alura. You don't want to hit Renew. So yeah, it kind of sucks to run Renew in Tempo Priest. I feel like Renew would actually be great in Tempo Priest because it gives you more resources and it gives you something to do, but again, it's hard because of Allura balance and stuff like that, and etc, etc. Next card. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear me very well, but okay, so this is going to be a little scuffed. We're going to be reviewing the last of the Priest cards because I had a recording error last time I did this, so we're going to go over some Priest cards, and then we'll do Rogue, etc, etc. So yeah, Gift of Luminance, I think is what we got up to from checking the recording back. Let's just get straight into it.
Gift of Luminance again. It is a buff card in Priest, and you will probably need a critical mass of those. I currently only have this as a one-of in my theory crafted Tempo Priest build because I don't think it's that good. It's kind of nice with High Abbess. The High Abbess, it's good with her because the copy will also have the spell burst and the shield to protect her. But I'm not amazingly thrilled by the card. I don't think it is an essential piece of any of the builds. Again, I don't like summoning copy. I don't like copy effects in the game. Typically, they're not that strong, and the only time they've really ever been viable is for things like Exodia, mage decks, and stuff like that. Typically, the value you get from them isn't that high. So.
Yeah, as I stated, I just don't like copy effects, and that is it admittedly is an efficient one, right? Like getting a 1/1 Divine Shielded copy of a minion with like an end of turn with a good death rattle, or even with like Allura herself is fine. It's just not as unfair as other classes. Typically, when you want copy effects, you want to be using the copies to do game-breaking combo stuff, like in Exodia Mage, for example. Yeah, the thing about Gift of Luminance is it's just objectively worse than Argent Braggart, right? Like, Argent Braggart is such a strong card, and it just sort of makes, you know, any other thing you do comparatively. Argent Braggart is a fine top deck if your opponent has minions, for example, or like it will contest basically any minion. Gift of Luminance gives your opponent a Divine Shield to get a 1/1 in comparison. Argent Braggart just absolutely destroys Gift of Luminance, and I did play it a little bit in Temper Priest. Temper Priest sucked. So
next is Cabal Acolyte. I was talking about this card before. It pairs really well with the Apathy card we were looking at before. It's a 4-mana 2/6 with Taunt, Spell Burst, Gain Control of random enemy minion with toolless attack. So you cast the spell that makes their entire board small. If they have nothing but big minions, you will get to steal whatever you want, because the spell will have to resolve first before the Spell Burst does. So you activate the spell, all their minions become small, then you steal whatever you want. Sometimes that will suck and you hit something low, but I mean, 5 mana for a Mind Control is pretty good, even if it is random. That's still quite good, and I think it will see play in Galakron Priest.
So yeah, Cabal Acolyte, actually probably the best priest card in the set. So good that it got nerfed by 2 health and was still seen in pretty much every single good priest deck. And yeah, I guess Mind Control tech for 1 extra mana with a defensive taunt body without the restriction of needing 4 minions in play is pretty good. In fact, it's Mind Control tech that can steal one specific minion with how you can control the way. The ease of control you have with this effect is kind of unreal. Like, Cabal Acolyte, such an annoying and degenerate priest card that it ended up getting nerfed, even though priest was not super strong. And even with the nerf, it still sees play.
It actually card. Seems better than Kel'Thuzad, which is funny.
It is better than Kel'Thuzad.
We have Flesh Giant, an 8-mana epic minion. It's an 8/8 and it costs 1 less for each time your hero's health has changed during your turns. I don't think this is as good in priest. Because the only real way your health is going to change during your own turn is through that one spell that damages you, and through healing. Renew is really nice with this, because it'll be each individual time you cast Renew, it'll do a different effect, so you can renew, you can hero power, etc. But I feel like this is much better in Warlock, where you can do things like self-damage. You have things like Soul Fragments when we get to... But we'll talk about that more when we get to Warlock. This is talking as if it was just a priest card. It is a big finisher for Priest, and if you could get this low enough, I think it would be fine.
So, yeah, pretty much right on the money. Priest just didn't have enough ways to change their health during their turns. Healing was basically the only way. I'm kind of surprised, though. Flesh Giant doesn't see really much experimentation in Priest at all, even though theoretically it should be really great, right? Like, even if you are just healing your face every turn, you know, in a control deck, 8 turns of just healing in Priest is not that unlikely, right? Especially when you have Renew to heal twice a turn, you can put Apathy on your minions, and you have Raise Dead as well on top of that, which is seeing play in Priest. So, I don't know. Mostly you just see Flesh Giant as a like Galakron random minion, and it's good from that. So, but you know, it doesn't see play in the decks. It's not that surprising, but I kind of wish it did see more play. You know, it would actually be great as a Priest minion, and maybe in this next expansion it will see some play. But yeah, much more of a Warlock card, for sure.
Next up is Disciplinarian Gandling. It's a 4-mana 3/6, and after you play a minion, destroy it and summon a 4/4 failed student. Maybe you could run this in like a Lackey-based deck. It's really good, particularly with the Prime in Priest, because you can instantly kill it. You're not risking getting stolen or silenced. So there's that aspect. Maybe this will see play in some kind of priest deck. I currently don't have it in my Tempo Priest build, because it's much more focused on sticking minions and having them have effects, so things like Veil Weaver, the Prime itself. You know, you want minions to stick to give them buffs, but you also want some onboard effects with those minions, like the High Abbess, for example, and I don't think Gandling really works in those lists.
The thing about Disciplinarian Gandling is, despite being like an incentive, like an insanely powerful card in Zoo, it doesn't even see play in Zoo Warlock. So getting it to work in Priest with even less option is unbelievable. Probably the lowest performing legendary card in the set, actually, which is really surprising. Gandling in some metagames would have been nerf worthy, right? This is just such an insane effect, and I'm surprised it hasn't seen any play. I'm being honest. This is genuinely one of the biggest shocks of the set for me. Not in Priest, but in Warlock. I think the thing with Gandling's... I think the biggest weakness with Gandling and Priest particularly is its anti-synergy with Voracious Reader. If you're playing a Tempo Priest list, which you would for Gandling, right? You want to be playing like a Zoo kind of Priest list, different from maybe the the Abbess and the Sethic Veil Weaver and whatnot. Like, you don't want to be running that package. You want to be running mostly small minions, lackeys, etc. The thing is that this has anti-synergy with Voracious Reader. You have to stick the Reader first before you play the Gandling. That seems really hard to do, especially considering that you want to have a Gandling turn where you play the Gandling and a bunch of like lackeys and small Death Rattle minions and such, to get value. And Voracious Reader is not a card you typically just stick on the board and hope it lives, right? You want to be dumping your hand and playing the Reader. And obviously the Voracious Reader is necessary for any kind of tempo or aggressive priest deck because they have no other card draw, right? So that sort of hurts the build quite a bit. Would like to see this in some capacity over the next expansion or maybe the next standard rotation, but until then, I don't see Gandling picking up any play, even next expansion potentially. It's a little too early to make that call, I think, given that we don't know any of the cards from the set. But Priest has never really been good at this zoo type of deck, and even though Gandling is a strong push in that direction, they just don't have the card draw to facilitate it.
Next is Brittlebone Destroyer. It's a 4-mana 3/3 with the battlecry. Your hero's health changes turn, destroy a minion. It's not hard for Priest to just heal on turns. They have things like Apotheosis. You have things like Renew. You can just use your hero power. So paying 6 mana to destroy a minion with a 3/3 isn't too bad. Vilespine Slayer saw play. And that's sort of how I see this card. This is basically just a Vilespine Slayer. Would that see some play today in Priest and Warlock? Maybe, especially considering that there are a lot of elusive minions in the metagame that can't be targeted by normal removal. This might just replace some of your other destroy effects because it can target elusive minions that you normally can't. Maybe. I haven't slid it into any of my builds currently. Notably is not that great in Galakron Priest because your hero power will eventually be replaced with the Galakron one, which loses you a consistent way to change your hero's health. But yeah, I still think it might see some experimentation. Maybe not in Galakron Priest. Maybe Galakron Priest is not the premier control deck and they run something else, but Galakron is such good value that I don't see them moving away from it. So
the thing with Brittlebone Destroyer mostly was that evasive minions kind of fell out of the format a lot. And I put that mostly on druids not using the side quest, not playing in big, and not playing the evasive minions very much. The only class that really leaned in on evasive minions, and even like some of them were removed, was Hunter. Hunter sometimes ran evasive Feywing, and that was basically it. They didn't even run Fairy Dragons anymore. They moved away from Dragons quite a bit, and they ran more of the secret packages because it was more annoying to deal with more broadly, because the evasive minions could be teched by Brittlebone Destroyers. Brittlebone Destroyer also kind of awkward in Priest in that, as I said, like, you don't want to be moving away from the Galakron package, and losing that ability to consistently heal yourself with your hero power severely weakens the Brittlebone Destroyer because it becomes much harder to activate when you're Galakron already, and you do want to be becoming Galakron early in Priest, as that's your best way to outvalue other control decks, even though there weren't that many in the format. Priest right now, Highlander Priest does use Brittlebone Destroyer occasionally, but it's definitely one of the weaker cards in the list, and often gets cut.
Then we have the Frazzled Freshman. It's a 1-mana, 1/4 common minion, that's it. Works really well for buff targets. It's really hard to remove this thing on turn 1 or turn 2. So it'll probably likely stick to get a buff like Power Word Feast, like Apotheosis around turn 3. Etc, etc. There are a lot of good buffs you can put on this thing. It's just kind of a shame that Extra Arms isn't in the format anymore. I think that Divine Spirit in a Fire Priest will play this in Wild, but I don't know how good that kind of a deck will end up being. Wild is a crazy format. So, again, I think it will see play in some tempo lists, because that is a really good stat line for it, but we'll see how things go.
Frazzled Freshman just doesn't line up with how the meta works. I'm not wrong there. A 1-mana 1/4 is impossible to remove essentially in the early game, but it's also not very impactful either. Hunters are doing way crazier things by turn 2, and it, ironically enough, making a 3/6 that can heal itself at the end of the turn, which is often, like, that's a really strong play in these Tempo Priest lists, is not good enough, right? Especially considering that, if you go Tour Guide, Phase Stalker into potentially Freezing Trap, you've lost your big minion in Tempo Priest, and that's where this saw any play. In the first week, people were hyping this card up quite a lot until Tempo Priest was found to be kind of trash. And I do think that if Divine Spirit in a Fire was an available combo in Standard right now, this card would be insane. But Divine Spirit was rotated, and probably for good reason. It allows them to print statline cards like these in Priest. My honest thoughts are that this will not probably see any play in the future unless great buffs are printed, and it circumvents the current weakness in Tempo Priest, which is its like a lack of card draw, like insanely bad draw in Priest. It's painful. Priest just does not have the draw to facilitate a card like this. You know, a 1/4 is great. Great defensive stat line, trades decently in the early game, especially with buffs. But again, like, you need those essential buff cards. You need your extra arms. You need like Divine Spirit Inner Fire combos to really make a card like this work.
Plagiarize. It's a 2-mana secret. At the end of your opponent's turn, add copies of the cards they played to your hand. This is good value, and I like that there's more secrets for Rogue because there's more things to play around. And you won't know when this triggers until your opponent's turn is over. So they have to press the end turn button, and then Plagiarize will trigger. This actually might be a little bad at times because you will just play like a ton of spells and you'll clog their hand up and they might burn their best card. But this might slot into Galakron secret decks that just want an extra secret in their deck because it's fine there. It's good value. But also, they tend to have a very full hand with things like Togwaggle. With their Galakron, they tend to draw a lot of cards. So they might not need the extra value in that. But maybe they do. Maybe you just want an extra secret because it helps. Maybe Secret Rogue tends to move more into a standalone style deck away from the Galakron now that it's been nerfed. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this might just be a one-of in some lists. I don't think it's that insane.
So it turns out that both of those things ended up being true. Plagiarize sees as a one-off in some Galakron Rogue lists to enable things like Vendetta, and just having some extra resources and value is really essential, especially in the early game, against some other value decks like Priest. And it also saw play in a standalone secret-style deck with a really low curve, like the curve tops are like Edwin Van Cleef and Questing Explorer, and you just use Plagiarize to generate more stuff to buff your Questing Explorers and your Edwin Van Cleefs, especially in the early game because people are playing cheap spells. So yeah, this card actually saw a lot of play, and despite my initial reaction thinking it was quite clunky, ended up being important in many Rogue decks over the expansion. Took a long time for Plagiarize to see playing Galakron Rogue though.
Maybe. Next up we have the Self-Sharpening Sword. It's a 3-mana 1/4 weapon, and after your hero attacks, gain +1 attack. So the first attack will be 1 attack, and the second attack will be 2 attacks, so it's a total of 3, then 6, then 10. So yeah, total of 10 damage off of this weapon, potentially. It's also a 3-mana 1/4 to start with, which is awful to start. But it will end up being a 2/3, then a 3/2, then a 4/1. So that's pretty strong, actually. I feel like if you can get this to consistently trigger, it'll be fine in like a Tempo Rogue kind of deck. I don't know if Tempo Rogue will exist. It doesn't fit into current Galakron archetypes. Maybe the stealth deck will go more aggro and they'll run things like this. They'll run the Hooked Scimitars, they'll run Lilian, etc, etc. And maybe that's where this finds a home. Because this... Oh, excuse me. This is 10 damage for 3 mana, which is quite good. But it starts slow. It's a slow burn of damage, but it will get quite scary.
So Self-Sharpening Sword ended up going into Stealth Weapon Rogue, which was a deck for pretty much the early Scholomance meta, and was one of the best aggressive decks in that metagame because of Self-Sharpening Sword with damage buffs, Infiltrator Lilians, Greyheart Sages to draw cards, aggressively statted stealth minions, Hooked Scimitars, etc, etc. Carried on the back of the card draw from Secret Passage and Cutting Class. Secret Passage then got nerfed, and this deck basically fell apart completely, and Rogue started to play things along the Galakron line of things, and also some more Miracle-y style decks, as we talked about before with the Secret Rogue deck, which also was hurt by the Secret Passage nerf. Galakron not so much, and in fact Galakron is coming back quite a strong rate towards the end of the expansion now, because of people's desire to play Rogue, and the sort of lacking... the lack of Secret Passage. Secret Passage is one of the best cards in the set, as we'll get to. And Self-Sharpening Sword, obviously a huge part of that aggressive strategy, right? Like, if you didn't ooze the sword, they would usually buff it to oblivion and just kill you with it. Like, it was an insane amount of damage.
Sin Blade. It's a 3-mana 3/3 with your weapon has +2 attack. Just a good minion. It's decently statted with a really strong effect. Like this with the hero power, it's the hero power into a pretty efficient removal tool. I could see this seeing some play in like aggressive Rogue if they run weapons. Again, Hook Scimitar. This last one we saw the Self-Sharpening Sword, etc, etc. This is quite efficient. I don't know if it will see play there. Maybe it's a 1-of, maybe it's a 2-of. Maybe they need a critical mass of stealth cards and they cut this. It's still quite good. The weapon attack does matter a little in this set because there are cards that care about weapon buffs, which we'll probably see some in these rogue cards here. As it stands right now, I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't really put that deck together myself. So,
well, Terratoxin Blade was a 2-of in every single stealth weapon rogue because giving your weapon +2 attack on a 3/3 body was insanely good. Like having an extra deadly poison essentially for your self-sharpening swords was insane, and it needed to be removed. This card was so dangerous because if it was up and a self-sharpening sword wasn't, or a hook scimitar, you were taking a lot of damage all of a sudden. Like every attack that your weapon gets through with this on the board doubles its effect, right? Your first attack deals 2 extra damage, then you've done 4 extra damage because of the Toxin Blade's effect, right? Like it's such a explosive and multiplicative effect that you needed to remove the Toxin Blade, and it was so good that they ran 2 copies of it in Stealth Weapon Rogue.
We'll see. Maybe. This is really strong though, admittedly, with things like the rogue weapon. It's not a battle cry either. It's just a passive effect, but you do have to have a weapon for it to work. Next up is Shifty Sophomore. It's a 4-mana rare minion with stealth with spell burst that adds a combo card to your hand. Adding combo cards to your hand is obviously not that good. We already know this from the World Kickmaster. Just saw absolutely no play whatsoever. There are some good combo cards like Van Cleef, like Eviscerate, etc. And a 4-mana 4/4 with stealth is a good stat line. Maybe this will see play just because it's a stealth minion that with not terrible stats. And the stealth rogue, maybe stealth tempo rogue wants this, so they just have a critical mass of stealth cards, but I don't see it at this point. I think they're gonna, if there is gonna be a stealth rogue deck, they won't be running this because it's just kind of slow.
Yeah, okay, I recovered it there, my god. 4-mana 4/4 is no good in a stealth deck. You want to be killing your opponent. Turn 4 was potentially a lethal turn in stealth rogue. They were using like much better aggressive minions than this. Also, I don't know, like haha value rogue, right? Like I know we said Plagiarize is a great value card. That's like the only value card that sees play in rogue right now, unless you want to call like Togwaggle or Galakron value cards, but really they're not. They're more card draw engines that just generate bunches of tempo by drawing expensive cards for cheap. This card is garbage. I almost forgot this was in the set.
Next is Cutting Class. It's a 5-mana common spell. Draw 2 cards and it costs 1 less per attack of your weapon. So again, this is one of those cards where weapon attack matters because you have the Volfera Toxin Blade, for example. That cuts this cost down by at least 3 because you have to have a weapon to have that equipped. So this will be 2 mana, draw 2. That's pretty good. That's about where you want this to be. I think this will be better in Warrior though, because a lot of Warrior's best weapons are around that line. You have things like Ankar, which is 2 attacks, it's 3 mana, draw 2, so it's about as good as an Arcane Intellect. You have the new card in Warrior, Reaper Scythe. We'll get to all that Warrior stuff when we do, but in Rogue, I don't think this is that good. Rogue also has enough card draw right now. Maybe in the Stealth deck they run this because they have weapon buffs and stuff, but who knows.
You can see where my logic was, right? I was like, well, you have Secret Passage, you know, Rogue has a lot of card draw as it is right now. I don't think they really need Cutting Class. But it turned out that Cutting Class was so efficient with the amount of weapon buffs they ran, and the Self-Sharpening Sword in particular was really good at this. It was just easy to make this cost nothing and cycle it, especially alongside your Secret Passage, right? So you would Passage, you would get a Cutting Class for free, you would Cutting Class to give you more resources to find your Eviscerates and your Savage Strikes to potentially push a lethal through that you wouldn't have found otherwise. So Cutting Class ended up seeing an insane amount of play. Even in Wild, Kingsbrain Rogue and Odd Rogue both use this card because they both have weapons and they're constantly playing this for cheap, and just the amount of and that amount of draw really helps them go over the edge to the point where Secret Passage had to be nerfed for both Wild and Standard to sort of bring down the power of aggressive weapon rogue decks.
Maybe they just need it for the draw. But I think Rogue will have more than enough draw for an aggressive deck. Next up we have Coerce. It's a 3-mana rare spell that destroys a damage minion, but combo destroys any minion. This is just Eviscerate. This is just Execute at a baseline, but with a little bit of work, it becomes an Assassinate, which is really quite good for 3 mana. It doesn't take much to get this to be better than that. Like, there are 1-cost spells. You could prep this, for example, which is pretty funny actually because prep sucks. You have Praise Galakron, for example, in Rogue. There are a lot of really great ways to combo this to make it into essentially a better version of Eviscerate, right? Might see play in as a one-of in Galakron Rogue, or in Tempo decks, or it just won't see play at all because it's not very useful.
I don't know if Coerce saw a bunch of play in Rogue, to be honest. Given that I can't remember it seeing play in Rogue, I'm going to say it didn't, but part of me also thinks that it did pick up and some people did use it as just efficient removal, because that's what it is. But in terms of Rogue, I don't remember if it saw too much play. Maybe it did, and I just don't remember. I think Galakron Rogue might... Highlander Rogue certainly runs it. And Highlander Rogue is actually not as weak as it seems. I think it's floating around tier 2, maybe tier 3 right now. So Coerce, okay in Rogue, I think. But no, I really don't... I don't have any strong feelings about this card. I could probably look it up. But given that I'm not certain, makes me think that I didn't see it that often. Rogue actually really was not a common deck I saw this expansion. I've seen it a lot more, towards the end of the metagame. Again, with this Galakron package, and that definitely runs this card. But it's mostly because it's a Highlander list, and they just want efficient cards, and Coerce fills that void for them.
Next up is Brain Freeze. We've seen this card for Mage already, as I said before, the important thing about this is that the freeze effect is front-loaded, and giving rogues freeze might matter, but again, I don't think this is a card you want to run main deck. I don't think it deserves a slot in there. It's just kind of taking up space, and you don't really want it to do that. It is notably better in Rogue, because Rogue has better ways to combo with things like Backstab, again with Prep, although you probably wouldn't want to Prep this out, etc, etc. It is also just a cheap spell for Rogue, so getting things together with like a Van Cleef makes this also really good. So basically you can freeze your opponent's best guy, play heaps of cheap spells, and then summon a gigantic Van Cleef. You can do that too. Again, the freeze is the important part, but it is only on a minion, so maybe that matters. I still don't think you run this card in your deck.
I don't think they did run that card in the deck, but it is used alongside, like from One Maker, for example, common pick from that. But again, it's just not a card you want in your deck. It's a discover option, and I think it was the same. Maybe because the curves were so low that they did run Brain Freezes just to make your Questing Explorers and your Van Cleefs bigger in those secret-style, extremely low-curve rogue decks. But I can't imagine that this was any better than, say, One Thief, for example.
Potion of Illusion again. We saw this again for Mage. I think it's better in Mage, but it's also okay in Rogue. You could run this with like an Anchor the Buried style Death Rattle build, where you put your 1/1 minion, like you add 1/1 copies of your 1/1 Death Rattles to your handing, for example. I think it's just a bit slow, and there's definitely no combos in Rogue you can do with this, and that's probably where this card is at its best. It's just very slow. In Mage I can see it because you can discount it from a 4 cost to like a 3 or a 2 with Sorcerer's Apprentices, and you're copying the Sorcerer's Apprentices, which you want to do because they're your combo pieces. But yeah, I don't see this being really that much of a Rogue card because it's basically pure value, and Rogue really doesn't need the value in their Galakron list right now, and this probably doesn't see play in a tempo-based or a stealth-based deck.
So I was correct on that front. It doesn't see play in any tempo or stealth-based lists. But shocking to me, it actually ends up being the one-of in Highlander Rogue. Copying Kronks, copying Togwaggle is actually good enough, especially when you have things like Togwaggle's Scheme as well to continually generate Kronkses, especially. That's actually a common line of play in those Galakron Rogue decks, is that they will Polkelt to get, a Kronks, and then they will shuffle a bunch of Kronkses back into their deck and just continually draw, like 10 Kronkses potentially if they've had the scheme in their hand long enough. And Potion of Illusion partly enables that because you can play Kronks and then pay an illusion alongside of it. So definitely a strong card in Rogue, but much more use in Mage for sure. Like infinitely more use in Mage.
And then we have Jandis Barov again. Same thing applies for Mage as it does for Rogue. The 5 cost pool is very polluted. There are some cool things you can do with this, but it's just going to feel pretty bad, I think, most of the time. Sometimes you'll high roll it, but it feels like it's not consistent enough to hit the usual things for it. I think it is much better in Mage than in Rogue. Rogue really just doesn't. I don't see this as a Rogue card really at all. It's much more of a Mage card. But again, it's a 5 mana 2/1, and sometimes you'll hit 5 costs to make this really worth it, other times you won't.
So it turns out I was completely wrong, and this is one of the best tempo cards in the set, and probably one of the best legendaries in the set. It saw play as a curve topper in those tempo rogue decks with Secret Passage, It sees play in Galakron Rogue. It sees play in... The only deck I think it didn't see play in was the Secret Rogue, and that's only because that curve topped out at about 3 mana. But I think she might have also seen some inclusion in those decks as well, just because she was that good. The amount of tempo you can generate from this card, alongside, the difficulty of your opponent being like, shit, I don't know how to, I don't know which one of these minions they would choose, or in situations where it's like, wait, it's really obvious, but now I've got, one really insanely powerful 5-drop alongside this, and especially alongside things like Potion of Illusion. This card was really, really insane. And I super underrated Jen Disparov, and a card that I think it would have been beneficial to know, beforehand what the average result was going to be, so that you could correctly evaluate her. I think that's probably where my sort of evaluation is weakened a lot, because I simply just didn't understand how high tempo this card would be on average.
Next up is Secret Passage. This card is absolutely bonkers. It's a 1 mana epic spell. Replace your hand with 5 cards from your deck and you swap back next turn. That's ballistic. That's a 5 mana draw 1, essentially. I mean, yeah, your hand will be replaced later, so you're not really refueling. But I mean, Myra's Unstable Element was a card that was played. So, if your current hand is not what you ideally want, but it's not terrible, you can just Secret Passage and get some more aggressive threats on the board, and then you swap back to get your other hand. So like, you can have a handful of reactive cards, your opponent isn't doing anything you need to react to, so you just play Secret Passage and you get a heap of aggro stuff. Or hey, you need to find lethal, but you don't have it. Let's just play your hand out, play a Secret Passage, and oh look, there's an Eviscerate I had in my tempo deck. This is nutty. It's really, really strong. And it just gives a Tempo Rogue, I guess, the fuel they need. So I think that an aggressive Tempo Rogue deck, with stealth minions, hooks, scimitars, all that sort of stuff, is definitely going to come together. And I think Secret Passage is the thing that refuels that deck and turns it into an absolute powerhouse.
Yep, basically 100% correct. Secret Passage was so insane that it got nerfed. Also, Secret Passage, insane card, probably one of the best of the set, and was nerfed adequately, I think. It literally carried aggressive decks on its back, because drawing 5 cards for 1 mana, which is often what this would do, was just insane, especially since you got to keep generated cards, and they did run 1 Thieves and whatnot. So,
next up we have Dr. Krastinov. It's a 5 mana legendary minion. It's a 4/4 with Rush, and whenever it attacks, it gives you a weapon +1/+1. I feel like this doesn't matter all that much in Rogue. I mean, you have things like Deadly Poison, you have the other minion, the Volpera, that gives you a weapon attack. This does give you a weapon attack, but I feel like it's just not that great for you in Rogue. You don't really care that much about that sort of stuff. I mean, Rogue has better ways of removing things than a 4/4, than a 5 mana 4/4 with Rush, and I don't think as Rogue you care that much about your weapons attack being buffed, especially if you have to use a 5 mana 4/4 to get there. I mean, Greenskin was run, admittedly, in Tempo Rogue decks with Leroy and Waggle Pick and stuff like that. And this does still buff the Waggle Pick, but I feel like to do that, you're potentially bouncing this card, which you don't want. Leroy doesn't exist in the format anymore to be bounced back, which makes that much less good. So the downside of the weapon is much stronger than it would have been, because Leroy, if you hit that with the Waggle Pick, it was better. We also don't have Raiding Party to draw pirates and the weapons from your deck as consistently anymore in Rogue. I just feel like Dr. Krasnov doesn't fit into Tempo Rogue builds running weapons. I feel like you would just run naturally good weapons, and you don't really want to run this to make them better. And if you did need to run something like this, you would just run Greenskin instead.
Yeah, Krasnov still play in every single Tempo Rogue deck. With Passage nerfed, it also... Well, actually, it's fallen off quite a bit because of Passage nerfs. But it did see a ton of play in that Tempo Rogue list, and Stealth Weapon Rogue, obviously. It was actually better than Greenskin in pretty much every single list, because it was potentially an effect that would happen more than once. Your opponent would need to remove it, it was removal itself, and giving your weapon +1/+1 was just that good. For the extra durability, not for the extra damage. Giving a Self-Sharpening Sword extra one extra durability meant, another 6 damage, potentially, off of it, because it would scale again. And I guess my thought process was, well, Rogue has enough weapon buffs, they don't need Krastinov. Krastinov gave them durability, which was huge for them. And it's Krastinov, one of the best legendary cards in the set as well. Saw a ton of play.
Next up is Infiltrator Lilian. It's a 4-mana legendary minion. It's a 4/2 with stealth. The Death Rattles to summon a 4/2 Forsaken Lilian that attacks a random enemy. I think this will probably fit into tempo decks with like stealth packages, because this is really good in those lists. The Forsaken Lilian is really nice. You can like trade into a 4 health minion, kill your Infiltrator Lilian, and then if they have no other minions, your Forsaken Lilian goes face and then contests the board itself after you make a trade. You can potentially use the Infiltrator Lilian to get a double trade on like an 8/8 if you need to, if the Forsaken Lilian wants to hit the minion for you. This is still good value. It's 8/4 for 4, which is quite nice, and it has stealth, so it's not going to die right away unless it gets cleared. But even then, are they going to use a clear on a 4/2 with stealth? I don't think so. This is a good aggressive card. It's just not insanely aggressive. It's not broken. It's just fine. And I think it sort of adds to more of the stealth package. I think it'll be fine in that deck.
People really underrated Infiltrator Lilian. Insane card, by the way. She was a perfect stealth minion for that stealth rogue deck because she generated she generated a stealth minion that also could deal 4 damage to the opponent's face, which was common. She was a minion you didn't really want to remove, but one that you could leave on the board stealthed. She was just good damage generation. 4 attack was nice, but because people saw that 4-mana 4/2 stealth stat line and they were like, no, this is terrible. She's still playing every single stealth weapon rogue deck, and she continues to see play in those decks, even if they aren't super popular right now. Infiltrator Lilian is definitely better than a lot of people evaluated her early. I don't think she is as good now as she used to be because of the passage nerf. But I actually don't know. Rogues are just not that common. And I guess because of that, Infiltrator Lilian is not seeing enough play in that sense, right? Like, I just don't see Lilian that often at all. But yeah, a fine card. And one of the, probably, and a decent contributor to rogue, stealth, weapon rogues' strength, for sure.
Next up, we have Steeldancer. It's a 4-mana epic minion for 4. 4/4 stat line. Summon a random minion with cost equal to your weapon's attack. So Rogue, I think, actually can use this quite easily because they have things like Divine Poison, like Deadly Poison, like the Volpera we saw before. But that's a lot of stuff to run together to make things like this work. And as I've said before, like, you don't want to run a bunch of bad cards together to make them good. You want to run cards that are good on their own, that are great together. The Steeldancer isn't that great on its own. And you're summoning a random minion with cost equal to your weapon's attack. Your average on that, you want to be hitting at least like a 4-drop to be happy about it. A 3-drop will be okay. A 5-drop is going to be fine too, but I mean, there are some really bad 5-drops now, and you're probably not getting any more than that. So I guess ideally you want to hit a 4-drop with it. Can you do that reasonably? In Rogue, kind of, because you do have things like your Hook Scimitars, like the growing weapon attack we've saw before. You have things like Deadly Poison to help buff your weapons to get there. And I mean, if you're desperate, you could run Dr. Krastinov, but I just don't see any of that stuff coming together to make Weapon Rogue a thing. Some of those cards might be good in a vacuum in more tempo-based decks, but I don't think they work in a weapon-based deck. So I guess the thing I missed importantly about Steeldancer was how consistently and easily it was for Rogue to draw cards. So running all of these seemingly inefficient synergy-based cards in an aggressive deck was actually really easy to do because you could draw so efficiently. On top of that, Self-Sharpening Sword by itself was so easy to buff and get big enough to make Steeldancer generate a decent minion. That was just enough on its own most of the time. You also had Hook Scimitars in that list that worked, and you could stack buffs with your Volperas, with your Deadly Poisons, and they did run Krastinov in that deck because it made their weapons last longer, which made the Steeldancers better as well. An insane card. Saw a lot of play in Stealth Weapon Rogue. Doesn't see much play in Highlander Galacron Rogue because I think you need a critical mass of those weapons in synergy, which the deck doesn't have. And as we've said many times, Stealth Weapon Rogue fell off quite a bit after the Passage nerfs, and I think Passage was the reason why this stuff was able to be played as it was. Steeldancer, admittedly, though, does see some play in Kingsbane Rogue as a curve topper in Wild, because obviously your Kingsbane is often quite big, and you know, it's not difficult to get your Kingsbane to be quite large and to summon giant minions off of it. And finally, we have One Thief again. It's a 1 mana 1/2 common combo discover a mage spell. This is definitely great as a rogue card. You can get mage spells in rogue, which matters lots of different ways. Mages have great spells, especially if you have them discover. You have things like Frostbolt. You have flame strikes that you wouldn't normally have access to. Blizzard you wouldn't normally have access to. Things like rolling fireball or bike burst damage through normal fireball, or etc. etc. Freeze effects you wouldn't normally have. This is really nice in rogue. It's not too hard to activate in rogue as well. And it also it helps quest rogues in standard right now, because it will put a random mage spell on your hand, which will trigger your quest, which will make that better. It's also mage spells usually are pretty good. So again, I see this much more as a rogue card than a mage card. A mage doesn't care about discovering random mage spells. They can just run good mage spells in their deck. Rogue, on the other hand, benefits a lot from mage spells because they can get board clears they would normally have access to, and etc. etc. Alright, One Thief was probably, I don't think this is controversial to say, one of the top 5 cards in the set. It saw play in Tempo Mage and most rogues, including Galakron, and it was actually a good play most of the time to Shadow Step your One Thief, because generating mage spells was insane, because you could generate things like Magic Trick, Evocation, or Burn, all of which you wouldn't have access to in Rogue. In fact, the card was so good that it saw play in Mage, right? Just to generate more mage spells. Insane card, and still seeing play in Rogue, still seeing some play in Mage, although admittedly less due to Evocation's nerf. Alright, Shaman's in a rough spot right now, so they really need the help. Let's start with Rune Dagger. It is a 2 mana 1/3 Shaman weapon, and after your hero attacks, gain spell damage +1 this turn. Spirit Claws, huh? That was a great weapon. This is not that great. One attack is painful, I'll say. It's not that great. It doesn't really remove minions, and I mean, 1 damage to face doesn't matter that much in the early game. Getting spell damage +1 this turn is great, but I mean, you can also just roll your totem and hope to get a spell damage totem that does the same thing. There are much easier and much better ways to get spell damage in Shaman, and I feel like you don't need to run this pretty bad weapon to do it. Definitely there are better ways. So, I'm right, but for the wrong reasons. Rune Dagger actually is probably one of the best ways to get spell damage in Shaman, because it is not great for your opponents to remove a Rune Dagger. Like, a 1/3 weapon is just not worth the ooze, even though the spell damage is potentially dangerous. Rune Dagger, I think, notably was used most importantly for the Sorcerer Substitutes, which are the neutral 6/6 that summon a copy of themselves if you have spell damage. That's what the Rune Dagger was mostly used for. The reason why Rune Dagger is not a great card is because spell damage Shaman is just not a great deck. It just doesn't have the tools necessary to get over the hump. It is just too fair of a deck to compete with Soul Demon Hunters, to compete with Face Hunter, Stealth Weapon Rogue early in the meta, and most importantly, you cannot beat Guardian Animals with the fairness that was spell damage Shaman. Next up is Molten Blast. It's a 3 mana rare spell that deals 2 damage, and you summon that many elementals. So it's a spell damage payoff card. You can deal it to face if you need to, and you summon small elementals. I don't think summoning elementals matters that much. It's a little bit of upside, but not much. They're probably going to be easy to remove. And this does take some work to get there, because you are playing 3 mana for this. It doesn't feel that pushed. There are a lot of really pushed cards in the set. This doesn't feel that pushed. It feels fair and okay. Yeah, basically right on the money there. Shaman cards are just too fair in this expansion, and Molten Blast is like a perfect example of that. In an expansion where 2 mana 1/1s that become a copy stat-wise of the best minion on the battlefield, you can't be winning games with a 3 mana spell that deals 2 damage and summons 2 1/1s at a baseline. It's just not good enough, even in a class that can, generate spell damage off their hero power, potentially. Your cards are just too fair against Paladin, against Hunter, against Priest's value, Everything in Shaman was just much too fair. Next up, we have Tidal Wave. It's an 8 mana common spell, Lifesteal, deals 3 damage to all minions. Wow, this is actually kind of good. Yeah, it is. There are some cards in the set that care about having spells with 5 or more, like the Overgrowth minion, for example. And this will heal you for a lot if you're behind and you have a lot of minions. Like, if there's 5 minions on the board, this will heal you for 15. That's really good. This is a board clear that also heals you a ton. It fits great in spell-based Shaman deck. It fits well in control Shaman lists right now. It's good for Highlander Shamans. It'll keep you alive. I really like this card. I think it's actually quite good. Does it put Shaman like into a playable state? No, because it's an 8 mana spell, but it'll really help the people who are currently playing Shaman decks for a control way, and this does help you stabilize in the late game.
Tidal Wave is like the perfect example of why you shouldn't rate cards on power level alone, because metagame dependency is important. This card, if you ignore like a potential metagame and just look at the card as it is, this is ballistic, right? This is a full heal if you manage to hit, a decent number of minions with it, right? The problem with a card like this is not, the text at all on the card. It's the fact that it costs you 8 mana. You typically, as a Shaman, even with the amount of healing you have, just will not live long enough to cast this 8 mana spell. Now, will you win the game if you manage to get to that state? Probably, yeah. It's not that difficult to put yourself in a position after casting a Tidal Wave to win the game, especially against aggressive decks like Hunters, Hunter specifically. But Hunter wasn't the only aggressive deck in the metagame. And when you're up against, Guardian Animals Druid, which this won't be clearing their board, this will just be slightly damaging their minions and leaving the gigantic threat still alive, it heals you slightly, and that's mostly all it does in this metagame. The only reason why, Shaman is too weak is because, well, imagine if this was, 7 or 6 mana. 6 mana, this would be insane. But 8 mana I think is fairly priced, and that's why it doesn't see any play, and it's why it didn't push Shaman over the edge, is because they just didn't have a way to get to 8 mana to cast this, and this is also really bad if you're behind. Being behind at 8 mana probably means you're going to lose the game anyway.
Like, this is really great against, Demon Hunter, for example. There's a lot of 3 health guys with, the Sociologist, Cycle of Hatreds, etc., etc.
True. But doesn't stop Demon Hunters from, equipping a weapon, Lapidary, twin slicing you in the face and killing you.
Next is the Trick Totem, which we already saw in Mage. I think this is going to be much better in Mage, even though they don't have Totem synergy and Shaman does. Because Shaman 3-mana spells aren't usually all that good. We have things like Lava Burst, which you could throw at anything. We have the Elemental Summoning spell, Molten Blast here, which is not that good. Again, I don't think this is that great in Shaman. Lightning thing, you're just going to get overloaded by pretty much any spell you play from this Trick Totem in Shaman, which is not that great. Again, Shaman spells aren't usually that strong, especially randomly.
So I was still under the impression that Trick Totem only casted class-based spells. And that might make it actually a much better card, especially in Mage, because you get a lot of secrets and stuff. But it turns out that I was actually wrong about Trick Totem, and it saw more play in Shaman because of that Totem synergy. Totem Shaman is like a tier 4 deck right now, and Trick Totem is in that deck just because they want more totems and more targets for Totemic Reflection. Sometimes Trick Totem is insane. It can give you totem buffs, it can give you Totemic Reflections, and sometimes that is enough to push you over the edge and just win the game off of its value. But Trick Totem is such a bad card, and often is so low impact that you just will not get anywhere with it, and it's actually detrimental most of the time to include this card in your deck.
Much better in Mage, where you have things like Secrets, Arcane Intellect, etc.
Yeah, as I thought. I genuinely thought that it casted that random spells meant from your class, not random spells from the entire pool of cards from 3 mana and below. And I think if I did know that, I would have rated the card accurately as being basically unplayable and one of the worst cards in the set.
Primordial Studies. We've seen this again in Mage. Discover a spell damage minion, your next one costs 1 less. They do have this overlapping spell damage theme between the two, and that's kind of cool. Shaman does have the spell damage totem, which always gives them access to spell damage if they roll it correctly. And they do have other spell damage minions available to them. Burn Shaman was a deck that did exist for a little while there, and maybe that will happen again. You run things like Lady Vash, who also has spell damage, just like Astromancer Solarian does, etc., etc. This can also give you a Lady Vash in like a spell-based control deck in Shaman.
maybe that's where that goes. Maybe the spell deck in Shaman gets a lot stronger because they run spell damage to make their things like Serpent Shrine portals way stronger, and etc, etc. So maybe that's the direction Shaman goes. I think Primordial Studies is much better in Mage with that spell damage deck because I can see more where that direction goes, but maybe Shaman's spell damage deck is also quite good.
The thing with Primordial Studies, and I'm gonna have a bigger. I'm gonna talk about a different card actually here. The thing with Primordial Studies in Mage specifically is that it can hit Astromancer Solarian and give you more Solarian primes. I actually really dislike the take that Lady Vash is a bad card. Wrong. Lady Vash is an extremely good card. In fact, one of Shaman's best cards right now is Lady Vash. The problem is that it's not Astromancer Solarian levels of good. And I don't think Astromancer Solarian is a problematic card either, but it was nerfed because of its power level. And mostly because of its ubiquity, right? Like, the reason why Solarian Prime was nerfed was because of its generation from Primordial Studies, right? And the thing is that Astromancer Solarian is not a bad card to generate off of the Primordial Studies because it doesn't require anything from you, the player. You play the Solarian, you eventually draw and play the Prime. It doesn't need anything. Vash requires you to have spells in your deck, right? Like Vash Prime, you play her, you draw the spells from your deck initially. And by the time that you're playing a grindy control matchup, drawing extra cards that cost cheaper with Vash is actually potentially hurting you by putting you into fatigue more. And that's why Control Shamans now run Archivist Elysiana and Priests don't. It's because Shamans hurt themselves quite a bit by forcing them into fatigue, and Priests, even if they do go to fatigue, don't care that much about it. They don't draw enough cards where, even if in a matchup where a control deck is going to go to fatigue in that way, Priests can generate infinite minions, can potentially generate their Prime infinitely to slow their fatigue and heal the fatigue damage. But they're also going to be much less in fatigue compared to their opponent most of the time, even with Elysiana available. Also, Priests will more than likely end up stealing the Elysiana anyway. So, yeah. Primordial Studies and Shaman just, generating... Literally, the difference between generating Lady Vash and Astromancer Solarian was enough for this card. Because Solarian was value without needing your deck, whereas Vash Prime did need your deck. That's not to say Vash Prime is a bad card. I think Lady Vash is a card that you're going to have to watch out for when the expansions rotate and Shaman starts to get more cards printed and better cards printed. And again, I don't agree with the Astromancer's Earth. I think Mage also needed powerful tools. Mage was going into this expansion looking really weak, and they ended up being one of, if not the best deck over the entire expansion. So, and again, I think part of that is the difference between, Lab Partner and Astromancer Solarian and Lady Vash. And it's, again, Lady Vash is a great card. She's just not as good as Astromancer Solarian.
Next up, we have Speaker Ghidra again. And I think the same things I said for Druid apply here. In fact, more so, to be honest. Again, this doesn't have to hit a big spell to be valuable. 3-cost spell, a 2-cost spell makes this fine. Again, you're never probably playing this on curve. You're playing it later into the game as a comeback tool. You have things like Rockbiter Weapon you can hit with this, or you could just play a Lava Burst and kill a minion and then clean up a lot of smaller stuff. There's lots of things you can do with Speaker Ghidra and Shaman to help you come back. You can also stick her on the board and potentially try and blow your opponent out with something like a Bloodlust, or like a Rockbiter Weapon on her itself. That would put her up to, that would give her 6 attacks, so she would be 7/7 with Rush and Wind Fury, which is quite good. I'm looking forward to playing Speaker Ghidra. You don't need a big spell to make her good. Even like a 2 or 3 mana spell makes her just fine.
I almost forgot that Speaker Ghidra was a Shaman card because I played her so much in Druid. And that's, again, another point of difference. Druid had Survival of the Fittest, Guardian Animals, Overflow, Overgrowth, right? All of those were insane spells to hit Ghidra with, especially you would get to a point where your opponent is like, right, I've dealt with all the giant beasts, and then you would play a gigantic Speaker Ghidra and win the game off of it alone. I don't even know Speaker Ghidra is seeing play in Shaman right now because I just haven't seen enough Shaman. But I can't imagine she isn't seeing play. Speaker Ghidra is an insane card. And I think, going forward, Speaker Ghidra will see a ton of play in Shaman. It's just that Shaman needs to get, more pushed cards that allow them to actually, keep up with sort of the other unfair things that other classes are doing.
But it's really interesting to see the difference between a card that is available to both classes, right? Like, Speaker Ghidra was one of the best Druid cards printed this expansion, arguably, and has barely made an impact in Shaman. And I think the reason for that, mostly, is that Shaman spells overload you, and that really hurts you. You want to be able to protect your Ghidra, and being able to play your Ghidra cast a spell, if you're overloaded the next turn, protecting Ghidra is going to be really hard to do. Even if she has a great impact the turn you play her, you want to keep her on the board because she is a great beat stick and a great win condition. And Druid was able to do that because it was able to make Ghidra bigger. You could play big minions alongside Ghidra. You could even heal Ghidra in Druid much more efficiently than you can in Shaman. And the big difference there is for sure the fact that you overloaded in Shaman and you didn't overload anywhere near as much in Druid at all.
Next up we have Instructor Fireheart, which is a 3-mana legendary minion. She's a 3/3 with a battlecry to discover a spell that costs 1 or more, and if you play it this turn you repeat this effect. This is nuts. This is a lot of value no matter when you play this. Like, you can play this on turn 3 and just get 1 spell, and she's still fine. She's still really good. She's just a 3-mana 3 that discovers a spell. But if you play her at, like, turn 10, you can discover, like, a ton of spells. You can go, like, a Lightning Bolt, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and deal a ton of damage to your opponent's face. She can also give you things like Tidal Wave that we saw before, like Earthquake to clear the board. And I don't think she needs to be alive for that to happen, because it's a battlecry effect. So as long as she gets played, she can just keep doing that over and over. You can just keep chaining spells together. I am kind of glad that it does say 1 or more though, because one of the Shaman spells in the pool is Lightning Bloom, and that would just allow her to go infinite if you discovered the right way, which would obviously be not great to play against. But I think she probably fits into Highlander Shaman, in Burn Shaman builds. You can put her in basically any Shaman list right now, and she'll probably be just fine now. I think she's a great card, and probably one worth crafting if you're looking to play Shaman.
The thing is that Shaman wasn't worth playing. Instructor Fireheart, boy, what an insanely powerful card. She sees play in basically every Shaman deck because she's great. But the Shaman class just can't handle it. And, even though she is an insanely powerful card, again, overloading is a huge problem in Shaman right now because you have nowhere to unlock those crystals, and that hurts Fireheart quite a bit. But the other things that hurt Fireheart are the fact that she's a Shaman card, right? Think about how busted Instructor Fireheart would be in Priest. You know what I mean? Or in Mage, or in any of these classes that have great spells that are cheap, that that you want to be generating a ton of stuff with. I mean, and this was a Mage card. It would actually be disgusting. It would be disgusting in Priest, it would be disgusting in Demon Hunter, it would be disgusting in almost any class except Shaman. And I think that's why it's allowed to be printed in Shaman. But she's seen a ton of play in Shaman, but Shaman itself hasn't seen play. Shaman is picking up a bit. I'll be honest, it isn't technically the weakest class in the game right now. I think that falls on Warlock. But again, Shaman needs help. And Instructor Fireheart is the kind of card that is really great, but Fireheart is the kind of card that you want to be supplementing your powerful cards and not being your powerful card, if that makes sense, right? Like, Fireheart is just consistency and generation, which is great, but you need great cards to be generated to give you consistency, and they just don't right now.
Next up, Runic Carvings again. Again, I think this is much better as a Shaman card because it has the Totem synergy, and Totem synergy kind of matters right now with things like Totemic Surge and Totemic Might. Buffing your totems and whatnot. I don't think you ever really overload them with Rush unless you're behind, but you could. I don't know if this will see play in Totem Shaman, but there is a lot of Totem cards being printed, and maybe Totem Shaman gets pushed over the edge as well. I mean, you could put Fireheart in that list, right? So maybe she's good there, and maybe Totems just go off. You could get like a free Runic Carvings from her, and then like I don't know. You could finish it off with a Lightning Bolt if you wanted to, or a Frost Shock, or an Earth Shock even, and silence a Taunt or something when you rush these guys in. Again, the possibilities in Shaman right now seem kind of fun, especially for by far the weakest class in the game right now.
The thing with Runic Carvings is that they just, like, a 6 mana for this effect is just not good enough. I will say that Runic Carvings is actually an extremely underrated card, and is admittedly one of my best cards in Spell Druid that I've been playing a lot of. I've been playing a lot of Spell Druid with Token Treant synergy. Runic Carving is one of the best cards in that deck, but it doesn't push the deck over the edge. And this card is especially bad in Shaman. You do care about Totem synergy. You do, but you want good Totem synergy. 2/2s with Rush, potentially, are not that effective. You want to be getting things like a heal on all your minions, or, card draw, or even random spells from Trick Totem is better Totem synergy than just 4 2/2s. I will say, though, that it is interesting that this card does not see play in a class that has access to Bloodlust. And that just really should go to show you that Runic Carvings in Shaman is just not worthwhile, not worth playing at all. Next up is Groundskeeper. I'm a huge fan of this card, as I said before, with Druid, and I think it's just as good in Shaman as it is in Druid. There are big spells, as we've seen before. You have things like Earthquake, you have Hagath's Scheme, you can run Bloodlust in an aggressive deck, you have Tidal Wave that we saw before, that will heal you up a lot too. Like, this is just such a really, really pushed card for the stats, for the effect. All of it is fantastic, and I love it in both Shaman and Druid, although I am a little bit better with it in Druid because of things, payoffs for healing, like Crystal Stag, and etc. There's already more of a 5 or more spell package going on there in Druid, but there are a lot of really good 5 mana plus Shaman spells that you can put into your deck that this feels good in, and it'll help you stabilize against aggressive decks, and that's always a good thing. I think it's important to note that Groundskeeper does see play in pretty much most Shaman decks right now. And most Shaman decks currently seeing play are called Concede Shamans, because they just run a bunch of healing, and their win condition is hoping that your opponent just concedes because they've healed so much. Groundskeeper's great at that. Man. Ras Frost Whisperer, we see it again too. He's a 5 mana legendary minion, 3/6. The end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies improved by spell damage. Again, I just don't think Shaman has enough spell damage right now to make proper use of this card, whereas Mage kind of does, because they have the 1 mana 1/3 with spell damage. They have like Primordial Explorer, I think it's called. No, Arcane Explorer, the little dragon with +2 spell damage, etc, etc. This still is a really potent card, and it might see some play, because even with just a totem on the board, it will cast Consecration every turn, the spell damage totem, which is kind of nice for it. I think it's fine. Ras Frost Whisper also seems really good in Shaman, but I think it would be better in Mage. I don't see spell damage Shaman taking off, at least nowhere near as much as Mage. Yeah, the reason why Ras Frost Whisper sees so much play in Mage, I think specifically, is because of Lab Partner. Like, a 1 mana 1/3 with spell damage is the best enabler for spell damage in Tempo Mage. So much so that you don't even play it on turn 1, because you want to be saving it for other combo plays, or you want to be making it cost 0 so that you can pair it with cram sessions and stuff like that. Shaman not having access to Lab Partner is probably what holds back all of these spell damage cards in the class. And I think if they do get more spell damage support, and if the pool for Primordial Studies for Shaman gets better, then expect to see Raz, expect to see Lady Vash, expect to see a lot of these spell damage payoffs pick up in Shaman as more of an aggressive deck style, because Ras Frost Whisperer is insane. So just, keep that in mind. But as it stands for the Scholomance meta, yeah, spell damage Shaman just didn't take off. Next up, we have Totem Goliath. It's a 5 mana epic minion. It's a 4/5, and it's a totem with a death rattle to summon all 4 basic totems and overload 2. Memes aside, I think this is really funny, that you can play like a combo with this with the guy that summons Alakia the Windlord. But it's probably not good in Wild. In Standard, I mean, this is kind of okay. It's a 5 mana 4/5 that will give you like a 1/6 or 1/7 worth of stats. When it dies, it's not too bad. Those minions will heal. One of them has Taunt. There's a spell damage one in there. But the Overload 2 on this really kind of hurts it. You're paying essentially 7 mana for this effect over 2 turns, and that's a lot of mana for a 4/5 that summons a 1/7. And the 1/7 afterwards is really easy to remove. Maybe it just slots into Totem Shaman because of things like Totemic Reflection, for example. Like, getting 2 copies of this is a good deal. Totems are kind of scary to push and give good stats to because of the totem synergies we have in Hearthstone, especially in Wild.
But I don't think this will slot into any standard lists right now unless Totem Shaman really, really takes off and they just like have this because it's a big totem they can copy. In Wild, this might be good in like Trog Shaman decks or whatnot, but you can't run an even Shaman right now, which is kind of a shame. Totem Goliath was buffed. They gave it +1 attack, and they reduced the overload by half. Overload by 1. It still doesn't see play. So, just to give you an idea of how bad the card was. Next up we have Devolving Missiles, and I think the same thing I said for it before stays for it here. The weakness of this card is its lack of consistency. And that is just as true for Shaman as it is for Mage. I mean, these are both classes that have access to transform effects anyway, through Hex, through Polymorph. We've seen these effects be good. I mean, as I said, Devolve was a great card. But this doesn't have the consistency that Devolve has, where you know that you're always getting a transform effect on the things you want to get a transform effect on. Even if you improve the stats of your opponent's minions with the Devolve, you're probably getting rid of an important Death Rattle or important activated ability, and you're changing their Resurrect pool against decks where that matters. Whereas this doesn't always happen for Devolving Missiles, and the upsides for Devolving Missiles, like devolving like one minion multiple times, is not worth it when you might need this to devolve multiple minions. And that's the same for Shaman as it is for Mage.
I definitely underrated Devolving Missiles, but I still think my rating in Shaman is correct. In Shaman, you just didn't need Devolving. It was run, but it was much better in Mage. Much, much better in Mage.
Once again, Lightning Bloom. I don't think it's as broken in Shaman as it is in Druid, but this with Trog and Wild is going to be really nuts. I think it's just good in general. You can just use this to ramp out to bigger stuff earlier, and I mean, the overload penalty does suck, but if you get enough of a ramp ahead with this, you're insane. Like, there have been people on Reddit talking about how you can, Lightning Bloom into a Chaothos, like double Lightning Bloom into a Chaothos, into an Eye of the Storm. What does your opponent do then? That's really hard to come back from early in the game. Like with the coin, you could do that on turn 2. So turn 2, you're basically casting a 10-mana spell with Chaothos. It's pretty nutty. I think you can do it on turn 1 if you run Barnes in your deck and have Barnes in your hand. I don't know. I don't think this is that broken in Shaman because there just aren't that many combos, but maybe there are some combos that are now enabled because of this with things like a Malago Shaman with like Eureka and stuff like that. Or you can even do this in Standard with Lady Vash, because Lady Vash will draw some spells you can go face with, like Lava Bursts. You can play Malagos, you can Lightning Bloom, and you can just chain a heap of stuff together and kill your opponent with it. That's always an option too. I think this is one to watch. Again, I seriously think Lightning Bloom is one of the top 3 strongest cards in the set, in both Shaman and Druid. So I definitely think watch the space, because it might see some change. It'll be really strong.
Lightning Bloom.
The last Shaman card.
Lightning Bloom in Shaman was actually played a lot in Wild in Big Shaman, and part of the reason why Big Shaman is so powerful as it is right now is because it can Lightning Bloom Ancestor's Call early in the game. Yeah. Just a pretty straightforward sort of situation.
Is a 2-mana Diligent Note Taker. It's a rare. It's a 2/3 with a spell burst that returns a spell to your hand. It's nice value, I think. It's not too bad. I mean, I don't know. I feel like this won't get run. Not even in Spell Shamans. They don't need the extra value. I don't think they care much more about meeting the requirements for the deck and, not being killed. I mean, and most Shaman spells will overload you anyway. So you probably can't follow them up by playing the same spell over and over again, especially if you play the Diligent Note Taker on board. And you probably want to play the Note Taker and the spell in the same turn so you can get the spell back. I mean, Kragwa the Frog didn't see play, and that is essentially this effect but slightly better. Although this effect is cheaper, but this effect it's already on the board and it's more telegraphed, I guess, than Kragwa's effect was. I don't see it. I don't think it's that strong. And maybe it'll fit into Spell Shaman or Highlander Shaman lists, but I think it's one of the more cuttable cards in those lists.
Yeah, basically, Shaman did a lot more than what they got. Even with the stuff they have, they just didn't have enough support to make the powerful cards actually worth playing. Diligent Note Taker, by the way, one of the best Shaman cards in the set. Sees play in current Concede Shamans to give you more healing. Copies your Lightning Blooms. It's actually very, very playable. And an insane sort of incentivizer for you to play some of your better spells because you just get copies of them. it suffers from the same problem of all Shaman cards, though, or all Shaman spell payoffs and all Shaman spells, is that it causes you to overload. And overload is so crippling because it is, it doesn't allow you to do the unfair things that the classes do. Because we just don't have overload payoffs in the set. And even in metagames where we do have overload payoffs like Wild, you just don't see that sort of stuff. Like I was saying throughout the set, like maybe Trog Shaman will pick up because of all these overload cards. No, they won't, because Trog Shaman in Wild sucks. If you kill the Trog, you lose everything out. In fact, the thing that makes Wild Shaman so powerful is things like Totem Golem, and copying Totem Golem with Totemic Reflection in Even Shaman, or in Totem Shaman, which does see play, so... Even Shaman is the best way to play Shaman, I think. Even Shaman and Big Shaman. And Big Shaman doesn't really play any of these cards. They play Overgrowth. They play Lightning Bloom, and that's it. The rest of the packages of cards that have existed for a long time. But as it stands right now, Shaman isn't the weakest class in the game. Warlock is, and we'll be covering Warlock in the next review. But Shaman is not that much further ahead compared to Warlock. But anyway,